As you are probably aware, there has been some resistance in the state of California to UCLA's announced move to the Big Ten ever since it was brought forth in late June. Much of that surrounding the potential impact on the University of California at Berkeley. The two schools are part of the same university system and share the same Board of Regents. Well, yesterday there was a positive resolution to the situation as the Board of Regents did vote to permit UCLA to make the move. So the Bruins are, in fact, Big Ten bound. That is today's big story as we take a look at how it all unfolded. The vote in support of the move ultimately came with some conditions for UCLA, as outlined here by Nicole Auerbach. There's been some concern about the impact on student athletes in terms of travel, academic support, nutrition. As Nicole outlines here, the school will devote financial resources to all of those issues. It will also pay money to Cal to help bridge the gap in terms of the differences in television revenue between the Big Ten and the Pac-12. That amount will be determined down the line. Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren released a statement in the aftermath of the meeting saying, quote, "The Big Ten Conference is grateful to the University of California Board of Regents for respecting the decision of UCLA to join our conference in 2024. The landscape of collegiate athletics is evolving, and the Big Ten Conference is in a position of stability and strength with unmatched opportunities, exposure, and resources for our member institutions and student athletes, with the collective goals to prioritize the health and well-being of our student athletes and forward our academic and athletic mission under the umbrella of higher education. We will continue our methodical integration process of UCLA and USC into the Big Ten Conference." UCLA AD Martin Jarman saying, quote, "We're excited to join the Big Ten Conference in 2024. We're grateful for the Board of Regents' thoughtful engagement in this decision. We've always been guided by what's best for our 25 teams and more than 700 student athletes, and the Big Ten offers exciting new competitive opportunities on a bigger national media platform for our student athletes to compete and showcase their talent." We'll talk all about this with Stewart Mandel coming up about 10 minutes from now. Turn our attention, though, to hoops. We got basketball tonight. Tyler Wall and number 22 Wisconsin hosting Lehigh. Badgers ranked this week for the first time all season. Action tips off at 7 Eastern, 6 Central, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. And now, as promised, Trey Demps is here. So let's dive into some hoops, Trey, and let's start with Wisconsin. I mentioned ranked for the first time this year. They were the preseason 9th place pick in the Big Ten. So doubt them at your own peril, as is always the story here with Wisconsin. What's your takeaway on what you've seen from them to this point?
There's a very mature team. They find ways to win. I think there's two things that stand out for me. The first thing is that they run the same offense down the stretch of games. They've been in a ton of close games this year. I think 7 of their games have been decided by 5 points or fewer. They're 5-2 in those games. A lot of teams, you see them, they start to run a lot of isolation situations down the stretch of games. But Wisconsin, they run that swing offense. They get the looks they want. They get the ball inside. They're playing a lot more through Tyler Wall and Stephen Crowd this year than I think a season ago. And so I think that's been successful, especially with Davis not being there this year. And so I think that's what's made them successful. And I think they really get through adversity better than any team probably in the Big Ten. You talk about the Iowa game. They blow that 5-point lead.
In a matter of seconds.
In a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
You know, Tony Perkins gets a steal. You know, Patrick McCaffrey makes the 3. They go to overtime, and then they just seem to get better through adversity. I mean, Tyler Wall knocks down a big 3. Jordan Davis knocks down a big 3. And I think they just have a ton of confident guys who are able to make big plays when adversity hits.
It's funny you bring this up because I have spoken about this through the years with Greg Gard and with Bo Ryan preceding him. And they made exactly the point that you made, which is we don't do anything different at the end of games. We don't run end-of-game situations. I mean, obviously they're crazy, right? You got 0.7 on the clock, and what are you going to do? I mean, you run that kind of stuff. But in other words, like, how are we going to run our last possession? We're going to run our last possession like we run our first possession. We're going to run our system, and we're going to look for a good shot. And it makes a ton of sense. It clearly works. I mean, you look at the narrow wins this year, as you say, but their average margin of victory is less than 8 points. So they've been in a lot of close games. They've just figured out ways to win them.
Yeah, and they're not going to blow out teams. I mean, you can talk about beginning of the year. They had a close game against Green Bay where they didn't shoot the ball well. And this team hasn't shot the ball well for the last 2 years. And I think one guy that doesn't get enough credit, though, is Steven Crowell. He's averaged 6 assists over the last 3 games. They play through him. They run kind of a read and react offense within the swing offense. He gets the ball at the elbow or in the block, and he's able to find guys for cuts and easy baskets. That's huge for a team that's not great at shooting the 3-ball.
And not great at shooting the 2-ball either. I mean, they're
True.
about 45% from 2-point range, which is pretty low down when you look at that rank nationally. So not a great shooting team, as you pointed out. They really haven't been here for a while, but they do so many other things well. They're a low turnover team. They don't give opponents second chances on the boards. All those things have worked in Wisconsin's favor. And we'll see. They don't have a very deep bench. I do think that's one thing that concerns you a little bit as you head into conference play and you obviously try to avoid injuries and whatnot. But this is a really good team, as they are year in and year out. Last night, Minnesota really needed a win, Trey, and it almost doesn't matter who it comes against. It happened to be Arkansas Pine Bluff. They ended a 5-game losing streak. This is a game that was close. I mean, it was a 3-point game with 7.5 minutes or so to go, and then they blew it open. What did you see from Minnesota last night that perhaps encouraged you a little bit, given how poorly they played?
Right. I think the biggest encouragement was that they made shots and they got good looks. When I look at this Minnesota team, they take a lot of tough shots, and especially Jamison Battle and Dawson Garcia. Those guys usually are up against the clock, having to play isolation basketball, taking tough contested 2s. They got a lot of catch and shoot open 3s. But I think the biggest thing for this Minnesota team is you can't judge them by wins or losses. Even after a win like last night, I think the biggest thing is habits, especially developing those younger players and understanding the value of each possession. You know, making sure that you block out, making sure that you get back on defense, post-entry feeds. They had about 4 or 5 post-entry feeds that went out of bounds. So I think teaching those habits and those fundamentals are going to be important for the young core of this Minnesota team.
Encouraging to see Braden Carrington play well. They lean so heavily on Garcia and Battle, as you were alluding to, and to have Carrington, who had scored 17 points in the previous 4 games combined, go for 20. That's really important for them. We mentioned this, we were talking about this yesterday with Trent Meacham. This is a really big stretch for them because these are games they absolutely should win. Yep. You got Chicago State, then I think maybe it's Alcorn State. After that, it is Alcorn State. You got to win these games, and you assume you're going to, and just to see some W's, to see the ball go through the basket, all that stuff seems to me it's really important for a team that has a lot of young guys that they're leaning on here.
Yeah, and I think establishing an identity, too. I think what kind of team do you want to be? And I think when you bring a lot of new pieces into the fold, it's kind of hard and it takes some time to establish that identity. But I really like the athleticism of this team. The more that they can utilize their athleticism, press a little bit, get into teams. You know, I love Pharrell Payne's ball screen defense. He's a guy that can hard hedge and black on those ball screen situations and make teams feel uncomfortable. And I think Cooper's a big, important piece for this team as well. And I thought earlier in the first few games, I think he was trying to do a little bit too much on the offensive end. He's a great passer. I'm one of the leaders in assists in the Big Ten and in the country. And I think he's a guy that can get guys involved. You mentioned Carrington. I think he's going to be big as well because he's a guy that can stretch the floor. And when you put him on the court, that gives more driving lines for guys like Garcia and Jamison Battle. So I think it's just going to be a step-by-step process. Once again, I don't think you could judge this team by wins and losses. It's developing those habits and playing good basketball.
Let's look at Maryland. They played last night, too. Did not play particularly well. Perhaps it was their way of welcoming UCLA officially to the Big Ten. They kind of rolled out the red carpet for them. Just got off to a brutal start for the second straight game. They have not gotten out of the gate well. They've played a really challenging slate here over the last 4 games. They got the nice win over Illinois, and then it's kind of fallen apart a little bit. They ended up losing by 26. It honestly wasn't that close, as you know. I mean, they were down by 38. At one point. What do you make of Maryland? They got off to the incredibly hot start, so much excitement around what Kevin Willard was doing, and then these last few games, it's kind of gone off the rails a little bit.
Well, I really think their offense is starting to affect their defense. They're getting a ton of open looks on the offensive end. I even go back to the Tennessee game. I mean, they had a ton of wide open catch and shoot 3s that they just weren't able to knock down. And I think when you get to the course of a game, when you don't start off shooting the ball well, it can really start to affect your defense. Over the last 3 games, they shot 6 of 20, 2 of 20, and 4 of 20 to start off the game. It's hard to come back and to continue to play good defense when you start off shooting the basketball like that. And so when I look at their team, I see them on the defensive end. They run a lot of different types of defense in terms of, switching up with zone, a little bit of run and jump, pressing a little bit. And because they don't have like a solid defensive principle, and that's the way that Kevin Willard wants to play, kind of just make the game a little bit more helter-skelter. If you're not able to knock down shots and play that kind of defense with consistency, I think it can affect your energy on the defensive end.
And they have not been able to knock down shots, to your point. I mean, the last two games, so that includes the Tennessee game and the UCLA game, they've made 11 field goals combined in the first half and scored 37 points. So that's 40 minutes of basketball, 11 field goals, 37 points. And Kevin Willard, he said before the UCLA game, like, we won't schedule it like this again. Right. He obviously felt like he had put them in a really challenging spot. And Mick Cronin, after the game, said, we're not 26 points better than Maryland. They're a pretty good team. We obviously caught them in a down point. They get 8 days off here. They're really going to need it. And then St. Peter's and UMBC. And then the other thing is a little disconcerting was Julian Reese going out of that game with a shoulder injury. Willard kind of downplayed it afterwards. It sounds like maybe even could have put him back in had it not been a blowout. Okay, more coming up from Trey in a bit as we continue. We'll look ahead to the weekend. Football news this morning. Purdue's Aiden O'Connell announcing via Instagram he is opting out of the Boilers' Citrus Bowl game with LSU in order to prepare for the draft. The former walk-on threw for more than 9,000 yards and 65 TDs in his career. The team's top tight end, Payne Durham, has also announced he will not play against the Tigers. One QB gone for Purdue. Another is returning, albeit in a different capacity. Legendary QB Drew Brees will work as an assistant coach in the build-up to the bowl game for Purdue. He is a accountable assistant. He will work directly with players on the field. So kind of a cool little twist there to get Drew Brees, one of the all-time greats at the position, back on campus in the build-up to the bowl and obviously the transition to Ryan Walters. Back to our top story, the official approval of UCLA's move to the Big Ten. It came via an 11-5 vote of the University of California Board of Regents yesterday at the end of their meeting. So the Bruins will join USC in moving to the Big Ten before the 2024 school year. You see the Athletic Stewart Mandel watched and reported on that meeting yesterday. And Stu, kind enough to join us now. Stewart, how would you characterize the nature of this discussion yesterday?
They did most of the discussion behind closed doors yesterday and came out and basically took a vote on the recommendation that I guess a smaller group of the Board of Regents had authorized. But at a meeting last month that I attended, we got to kind of see, UCLA's chancellor was there. There was a presentation, some of the issues that they were considering. And I would describe them as twofold. One, the concern about the impact on UCLA athletes and the increased travel from joining the Big Ten, and the concern that Cal, which is also a part of the UC system, is getting left behind in this and will make considerably less revenue staying in the Pac-12. So the measure that they approved yesterday was, okay, we're going to allow UCLA to go forward and join the Big Ten, but they will likely have to give back some of the money that they're going to make from the new Big Ten TV deal as kind of a subsidy back to Cal Berkeley.
How important is this move for the financial health of UCLA's athletic program?
Huge. UCLA has been running up a huge deficit over the last 3 years due to coach buyouts, and then Under Armour, when COVID started, bailed out of a deal on them. Over the past 3 fiscal years, they've gone $100 million into debt. So you look at the Big Ten TV deal that was announced recently that averages over $70 million a year. When you throw in NCAA tournament revenue, bowl revenue, it's easy to see that number getting up to closer to $100 million a year. And that's probably going to dwarf the Pac-12's deal going forward. So Martin Jarman, their AD, has said, since the move was announced in late June, that if they weren't making this move, they were probably going to face having to cut some Olympic sports because their financial situation had gotten that bad.
USC is a private school, so for people who might not understand the ins and outs of the UC system, they were not affected by this, and there's never been a doubt that that USC was coming. They're certainly not subject to the same issues that UCLA is. What does it all mean now for the Big Ten, given that this is settled and USC and UCLA are definitely joining?
Yeah, so I don't know that most people were worried that they would be, held back. It was unclear, we did learn that the board had the authority to do so. They could have blocked the move. It was unclear how exactly they would have extracted them from that contract. But now the Big Ten can move forward without having to worry about that. And I think, the next thing that Big Ten fans are curious about, obviously, is come 2024, will there be divisions? Will there not be divisions? How will that scheduling format look like with 16 teams? I think that, they decided to kind of stick with the status quo for next year. But I can't imagine we will still have, that we will have an 8-team Big Ten West and Big Ten East by the time those two schools arrive.
Stu, more broadly now, what happens next, in your opinion, in the expansion world in college sports?
The next milestone, if you will, is the Pac-12 getting its TV deal done. It has been delayed in part because they were waiting on the UCLA decision. George Kliavkoff, their commissioner, said recently he expects it to be finalized in the first quarter of next year. And a lot of people waiting to see what kind of money they're able to get from that. It will be much more than the Big 12 did recently. After that number is known, then I think if Kevin Warren still has ambitions of expanding and he's left the door open, that would be the time to do it if he was going to try to get, for instance, Oregon and Washington. But from what I understand, from what we've heard, the momentum for that has slowed down since last summer. But again, he, in his public comments, continues to leave the door open.
I do want to get into the CFP. Obviously, these are heady times for the Big Ten with two teams headed to the college football playoff. Let's start with Michigan and TCU. Just curious, kind of from your point of view, you've followed both these programs all year. What will you be focused on most closely in terms of determining who wins the game?
TCU's had a phenomenal season. I think this will be, though, certainly the strongest defense and just the most physical kind of team that they've faced so far all season. Can they play a slightly different style than they're possibly used to? I mean, TCU has just really feasted on the big plays on offense. And Sonny Dykes, an air raid protege, Max Duggan, their great quarterback. Can they make those kind of big plays against the Michigan defense that, frankly, hasn't given up a lot of them this year? Michigan, I think we know what you're going to get from them offensively. We've seen it all season. The most impressive thing to me about Michigan this year is they just go out and take care of business. They haven't had a lot of drama other than the Illinois game late in the season. So, certainly Michigan goes in as a heavy favorite, I think. But you never know with these games in the 3 and 4 week break between the conference championship and the playoff games, maybe what wrinkles might emerge, what younger players that haven't had as big an impact so far might step up after those extra weeks of practice.
Frankly, if there's a team that needed that break, I would say it's Ohio State. I mean, they were questioning everything, as you know, coming out of the Michigan game, and now all of a sudden they get the second lease on life here. It does come against Georgia, who is the team I think has been the consensus best team all year. But you look at talent-wise, I was talking about this with Joel Klatt yesterday. Certainly Ohio State matches up in terms of talent with Georgia about as well as anyone in the country does. What would it take, in your estimation, for the Buckeyes to pull off the upset and get a win?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an exact parallel. They've only lost one game, but they remind me a little bit of like those teams in the NCAA tournament, let's say Kentucky, who everybody knows has the players. Maybe they underachieved a little bit in the regular season, and then they flip a switch when they get to the tournament. We know Ohio State has the talent, probably one of the only teams in the country that's in the same ballpark as Georgia talent-wise, but they've had a lot of issues this year. And so the question is, over this last month, has Ryan Day done some self-evaluation and figured out why have they had such trouble running the ball? With or without TreVeyon Henderson, they haven't really been able to have that physical rushing attack when they need it. Obviously, the secondary in particular got exposed in the Michigan game. Georgia's a different offense and a different style of play. You're going to have to worry more about their tight ends, in particular Brock Bowers, than kind of the receivers beating you deep. But I'm not counting Ohio State out at all. I do think Georgia has unquestionably been the best team in the country this season. But Ohio State, again, we know they have the skill set and the talent and a great quarterback. Can they put it all together and frankly have their best performance of the season in this game?
A few other things I want to ask you about before we let you go. I do want to ask you about the coaching hires. We had Ryan Walters officially introduced yesterday at Purdue. We've also seen Luke Fickell and Matt Rule in this coaching cycle here for the Big Ten. How do you feel like the Big Ten fared in that area?
It's a very impressive set of hires. And Nebraska, I think, got the guy they wanted all along in Matt Rule, who has experience rebuilding fallen programs like Nebraska is in right now. Wisconsin just kind of blew everybody away that was assuming they would just promote Jim Leonhard. This is going to be a total culture change for Wisconsin. You're hiring a guy, though, who has proven himself, obviously took Cincinnati to a playoff. And then when he hired Phil Longo, the OC from UNC, who is, again, an air raid disciple, it was kind of a wow moment that, wow, Wisconsin's really doing this. They're going to deviate considerably from the Barry Alvarez style of football that they've been playing for 30 years. And then Ryan Walters, obviously much less proven than the other two, but I think is a really great fit there. Jeff Brom was going to be tough for anybody to replace. He's had great success there, but Ryan Walters is one of the more respected up and coming coaches in the country.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, the NCAA announced this morning that Charlie Baker is going to be the new president. He will take over for Mark Emmert, who is stepping down here, and it seems like Baker, who is the former governor of Massachusetts, will step into this job in relatively short order. What are his biggest priorities right now? Is it about trying to get federal legislation behind NIL? Is there something else you think that's top of his list?
I'm not surprised that the NCAA hired a politician, and in particular one who everybody is describing as a really good bipartisan politician, because that is the NCAA's goal right now. Is basically they've been everybody, college commissioners, all these higher ups who are throwing their hands up at the wild, wild west that has emerged here with the NIL, is hoping for, frankly, an antitrust exemption from Congress so that they stop getting sued every time they try to put a rule into effect. Whether that's realistic or not, I don't know, but certainly somebody of his background is going to have a better chance than if they took the usual route and promoted a president of a university. But remember, the NCAA is also in the middle of kind of an existential moment. They're rewriting the Constitution. They have this transformation committee right now. I mean, the NCAA is trying to figure out what is our role going forward in the new landscape of college sports. It's going to be much more decentralized. I think that's going to be an interesting thing for somebody who's come from completely outside the NCAA structure to walk into with a fresh perspective. And how exactly should the NCAA look like in 2022 will be a huge priority.
Fascinating times. Never seen upheaval like this in such a short period of time in covering college sports. I know you haven't either. It's just been utterly fascinating. Stewart Mandel, thanks so much. Again, Stu from The Athletic. The Audible podcast is tremendous with Bruce Feldman as well. Always a great listen. Stu, we'll see you at the CFP.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Big Ten hockey standings. Minnesota's on top, 8-2 in the conference. As you can see, they are ranked third in the country. Pretty close behind them, fifth-ranked Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State, all within 4 points of one another. Michigan is 18 points, I should say, out of first place, tied with Notre Dame, and then you got Wisconsin bringing up the rear. But the Wolverines still rank 7th in the country. So 18 points out of first place in the Big Ten, 7th in the nation. Pretty fascinating. Paul Caponigri is here. And Cappy, I have to say I was a little astonished. We were at the midway point, as I articulated
it's happening so fast.
Right before we went to break. But you were telling me the calendar we're not necessarily chronologically at the midway point. We're at the midway point in terms of games. So explain kind of why that is.
I mean, really, it's simple. Like, hockey, you had to get a break. It's kind of nice. You get a holiday break. I mean, Michigan has 33 days between games, and I think I think they've decided to start scheduling that way because of how they lose players. They're going to maybe lose 5 guys to the World Junior Tournament, and they would miss. They used to play in the GLI, which is the Great Lakes Invitational in Detroit, which is a big tournament, and they've decided not to play in it because this affects them in the pairwise, and that the computer system does not see when they're missing players and they lose them in games. So I think it's a smart way to schedule, knowing you're going to lose players.
So let's go through then. So it is midseason. We have established midseason. Let's run through it. Let's start with the Coach of the Year. Who do you got?
You know, this one, a lot of great coaches, obviously, but this one was pretty obvious. This guy's going to be up for National Coach of the Year, too. Adam Nightingale has done a phenomenal job at Michigan State. You know, he came in probably bringing young, new energy, a different style of play, and clearly it's working. I think it's come along faster. I think he's been able to bring in some grad transfers. And then some freshmen have been surprises, but you just feel differently the way you watch them play. They've played a really defensive style in the past, and you're seeing a team that's more aggressive and trying to start the pace, not kind of play back and play defensively on other teams.
It's crazy. I mean, you go from bottom 2 in the league 6 straight years to now ranked 11th in the country.
They haven't won a playoff game. And this is year 10 of Michigan in the Big Ten, and they have not won a playoff game yet. I kind of like their chances this year.
Wow, that is staggering. How about your Freshman of the Year?
Freshman of the Year, I mean, this one could have been for Player of the Year. That's how good this freshman class is. But Adam Fantilli, for me, won it in a slight margin. He's missed 4 games. He missed for illness, and then last week he missed for Team Canada, have him come a week earlier, which is kind of dumbfounding for me why they had him so early. But Adam Fantilli, 26 points in 16 games. Missing those 4, he'd clearly be the leading scorer in offense. He's leading Michigan. He's just 18. He turned 18 in October. He's just doing some terrific things there, and I can't wait to see his elevation in the second half coming back from that. Because most freshmen, they're feeling it out the first half, and then they get going in the second. So the fact that what he did in the first half, see what he do in the second would be great.
Those 26 points, 4th in the nation.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty remarkable. Who's your goaltender of the year?
Goaltender of the year. This was tough too. Really, there's 6 guys in the mix for when we see it down at the end of the year. But Dylan St. Cyr, another reason why Michigan State has really kind of elevated to that top part of the Big Ten. He's been fantastic. Kind of came down to him and Liam Soulier for me at Penn State. And almost this last weekend was kind of the breaker for me. He just had a little better weekend. But we're halfway through the season. We'll see how the rest goes. But right now, he was fantastic Friday night against Michigan, getting that win, that first win against Michigan in 7 tries. So that was a really big win at Munn. And you could see it on his face. He had to work hard for that one, and he earned it.
Second in the Big Ten in save percentage. And again, a guy who started his career at Notre Dame. So he's in the Big Ten, then went to Quinnipiac.
Year 6, he's figuring it out. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but it really, truly is sometimes.
For some people, it takes 6 years academically in college to figure it out.
Well, he's probably on his second master's degree right now.
Exactly. How about your defenseman of the year?
This one was a little bit of a surprise, but this is what's great about it is guys maybe don't expect. Christian Berger has been fantastic at Penn State, and a big reason why they're a bit of a surprise. They're number 5 in the country, both in the rankings and in the pairwise. I don't think anyone saw it maybe coming that well. I think you saw them growing, but he just does everything for them, offensively, defensively. This is Defensive Player of the Year, so it's not all about stats, the big stats. He blocks a ton of shots. Some of the less pretty stats in hockey, but he's always out there in the big moments at the end of games, maybe protecting a lead. He's also out there when they need a goal. So he's really elevated his game every year. He's a junior now. He's come better and better, and he leads that D-corps, and he's a huge reason why Penn State's up where they are.
To your point, 39 blocks on the year, and they are in the top 2 in the Big Ten in terms of fewest goals allowed per game. Player of the year.
This one was easy, even though, there's a ton of guys, and that's what I love about the Big Ten this year. I was thinking about this stuff. It's so difficult, but it's great because there's so many good players, and it was Brock Faber from Minnesota. I mean, he could have been he was up there last year towards the end, but he's really a guy. He's like Christian Berger. He's a defenseman, does it all, scores, plays in all the different situations, and he brings those intangibles to me. I think his leadership, he's the captain of the best team, in my opinion, in college hockey, and he's leading a bunch of guys. We got a ton of freshmen doing a lot of great things, but you know what? You need some veteran guys to kind of, maybe if there's some highs and lows with those guys, to bring in that calming influence. So aside from his great play, he brings that tangible of leadership, and that's why he's my Player of the Year.
And as you say, certainly could have seen this coming, was the Defensive Player of the Year in the conference a season ago. Your surprise of the year?
I mean, Michigan State as a whole, we've kind of laid out why with the coaching staff. And, they have a couple young freshmen in Russell and Dorwart that have really surprised. But that's the beauty of sports and in hockey is you just don't know. And you don't know what a coach is capable, and you don't know what a 60-year goaltender comes in and what he can do. And we're seeing it. Now, we'll see if it can continue. I think we had this surprise last year with Ohio State, and they stayed up there but just missed the NCAA tournament. So we'll see how Michigan State can do after their great first half.
Finally, how about an all Big Ten team?
I mean, wow. This was fun, too. Tough and fun. But, back end, I'm going with, Dylan St. Cyr as my goaltender. I mean, he kind of showed it with, Berger and Faber as my defensemen. And then up front was tough. I mean, you could have gone with an all-freshman forward line. You could have thrown Logan Cooley in there. You had a few other guys, but Fantilli, Nyes, and Snuggerud, can you imagine putting those three together on a line? And you're missing Cooley, who was the number 3 pick last year to Arizona. Adam Fantilli, who's going to be drafted this year, probably number 2, whoever ended up lucky enough to get that pick. And then Nyes and Snuggerud are already drafted. It's just so much talent. This is really the best I think the Big Ten has been in the 10 years that we've had it. We're at a kind of a peak right now. Hopefully it's a continuing peak, but you're seeing it in the statistics and in the standings and in the rankings. It's just really an exciting time for the Big Ten, and it's amazing to see. I'm just dumbfounded at how these freshmen come in. I mean, it's happening all over sports now, in college sports. They just come in and are dominant.
How much of that is just all the junior hockey they play? And
I think the junior hockey, and then these guys. I watch a lot of youth hockey around the Chicagoland area. And these guys are doing it at such a young age now. Everything's being accelerated. Yeah. I think in all sports, right?
Well, this
AAU
is
for basketball.
We get into youth sports.
It is just really
the number of games they play.
They spend more time on the ice. Used to practice twice a week. Now they're on every day. I think as long as they don't get burned out, I'm happy they're doing it. And it's fun to see them accelerate at 18 years old so easily. I'm quite jealous.
The byproduct has been it's fun to watch because you
fantastic.
got some really, really good players.
Absolutely.
So just to be clear, only team playing in the Big Ten this weekend, Ohio State playing Bowling Green.
Right. And then they get a break.
And then it's pretty much we're done.
Till after Christmas, there's a few holiday tournaments. Michigan State has the GLI, and Wisconsin is hosting one at Fiserv Forum in late December. And then you have just a few non-conference games. And then we kick back up the first week of January. So I always liked it. You got to go home for maybe 8 or 9 days, get away from it. And I think some of those freshmen, they go away, they come back. You don't feel as much like freshmen because you're coming back with that experience of a half under your belt. So in the way the Big Ten is set up this year, it's going to be bananas in the second half. Right. Just a lot of talent, fun to watch.
Reinvigorate. All right, so we will see you after the new year.
You got it.
As we dive back into this stuff and get into the
where did all the time go?
Where did all the time go?
Enjoy our holidays,
yes,
right?
It's one of the themes of life.